Hello, hello. This is Pete Oslin with Bending Rules, where we talk about all things entrepreneurial and also interviewing different like rule breakers too. We might have some people that aren't just entrepreneurs, but I'm kind of expanding the purview of this. Just a little quick setup on that, and maybe have like some Olympic athletes and some other kind of what I kind of deem risk takers. But today we have an entrepreneur with us, Taylor Welsh, that I've known for several years, although I'm not that intimate with her story and how she developed her company. We got connected in the entrepreneurial circles, but I'm excited to have her because, she's always thinking about the next idea, was able to execute through a company and to an end result. And she's still doing that. And that's going to be, so it's going to be fun to hear about what she's up to now. But I think in terms of your journey, Taylor, welcome. I think there'll be a lot to learn for people here on, kind of how you manage your way through that. So thanks for coming on to the pod and helping future entrepreneurs.
Absolutely. Super excited to be here, Pete. Thanks for having me.
Very cool. Very cool. Okay, so I think the easiest place to start sometimes for me, as you and I were talking about this a little bit in advance, is just if you could just give us a bit of like your background and as it sort of pertains like the origins of your entrepreneurship. Maybe when those thoughts were first seeded, or was a result of like a layoffs or things of that nature, and you're sort of put in a position where you had no choice. I mean, kind of take yourself back in time, and look at where you're at now and say, okay, this is sort of what I do professionally in a lot of ways, which I'm not sure that's what you envisioned for yourself. So, help us understand sort of that, your path to getting to where a little bit where you're at today.
Yeah, I didn't plan to be an entrepreneur. I would say I grew into it. In my early 20s, I joined a company called Walker Tracker as employee number one. The original founder, had built the first stage of the platform, and he was a CTO. And this was like back before the iPhone and back before Fitbit or any of those wearable devices were on the market. And he was very interested in gleaning insights about people's behaviors and moods and experience when they move more throughout space, like walking and biking and getting out of their cars. And so he built a direct to consumer website to help people connect around that. And I was very fascinated with what he was doing. I really wanted to be in the wellness side of things. And so I jumped on board, and, early stage, we were trying to figure out, how do we monetize this? How do we grow this? And the B2B wellness play opened up a lot of doors for us. So we moved into the corporate space. We started doing walking challenges for companies, which then over the next 11 years turned into a full end-to-end wellness platform for organizations to motivate people to be healthier. And for me, I was employee number one, which meant I did customer service, customer success, marketing, sales, basically entire customer life cycle and engagement. And then I moved into operations, invoicing, billing, KPIs, reporting, legal, accounting, and just was learning as much as I possibly could to be more useful in the company. And then when I moved into the role of CEO, I learned everything else really
Yeah.
fast.
Okay. You got there pretty quick on this Walker journey, and you started by saying, I really wasn't that entrepreneurial, but wait a second, employee number one is pretty entrepreneurial. I mean, you may not be the person that had that original idea. Obviously, in this case, you weren't, but with number one, you're basically a co-founder, and you're taking a similar entrepreneurial risk, And I've always said this, and I wonder if you have this sort of sentiment too with like your employees, like, because I remember with all the companies that I've started, those first three or four in, the founder gets a lot of credit, for being this entrepreneur and everything of that nature. But I'm like, man, you guys are all entrepreneurs. Like, we're all entrepreneurs. There's a different level of risk that maybe we're taking because of where we're at in our time of our lives and the age and this kind of thing, like what we can invest, for example. So there might be more financial risk for the CEO or something like that if they're raising the money, but there's still a lot of risk. So you kind of went into something pretty entrepreneurial right out of the gate, and you're doing it, sounds like, because you're kind of passionate about solving this problem. But the way you just described it, Taylor, like, to me, I feel like you may as well have been the founder, because when I was a founder, I felt like I was always wearing 10 hats, you know? Did you
Oh
feel
yeah.
that way?
Yes, we wore all the hats. And um, it was putting out fires. It was learning every single day, and my brain was on fire in the best possible way. And so from a very early age, I think it was 22, I wanted more, and I built my life around this thing. It was what I woke
Yeah.
up for. So from just very early on in my career, I had this deep, immense sense of purpose and mission
Mm.
and drive in the work that I did. It was very meaningful to me. So, and I don't think everyone gets that, especially that early on.
Yeah. No, I have to agree with you. And like, so did you do anything, like, did you try anything prior to that in corporate America and feel that it was unfulfilling? Or was this sort of like something innate that you just recognized in yourself? And what's the point of even doing that stuff? Because I'm not going to probably enjoy it other than it might look good on my resume. Because it was, I don't know, Intel or somebody big and, whatever. I mean, so did you try anything prior to that that sort of gave you the conviction that you need to be joining a company that's that small?
I wish I had the forethought to think through all of that in my early 20s, but I didn't. I guess I was kind of an entrepreneur since I started working. I taught yoga and I taught fitness classes, and I was a personal trainer, and I worked at a bunch of different gyms throughout college. I went to school for human physiology, and my goal was to be a physical trainer. I wanted to work on sports teams. And through training and working with individuals to overcome their own barriers to entry with exercise or whatever health journey they were on, I realized how important the wellness aspect is and the prevention aspect is. And if we can help people with healthy habits early on and get people engaged in exercise, it's just so meaningful for their life across the board. And a lot more cost effective from a healthcare standpoint on the other side.
Yeah.
So I didn't do corporate America. I was always a 1099, and I never thought about corporate America. It was never something that I was like, that sounds like fun. I think I'll do that. Um,
Hmm.
I think I've always been driven by heart over head a little bit when it comes to work, which
Yep.
thank goodness it's worked out for me. And it has from a monetary standpoint, but I have led with mission and purpose and heart and the things that motivate me and drive me. And because I know I'm going to do my best work, and I'm going to wake up for that every single day.
That's a good message, I think, for the first time or even second time entrepreneurs that are part of this crowd, because I feel there's an age where, and it can happen at any time, but the first time this happens for a lot of people is around 25, 26. I mean, I talk to young adults this sort of age going through their careers where you kind of get out of college or grad school, whatever you're at, and you don't find that purpose and you don't find that fit, and you kind of jump around doing all these things. And to sort of start with that in mind right away and just kind of lean into it, I think is good. A lot of ways, good advice, and the rest will sort of, I think, materialize because you're going to work hard, you're going to learn new things, and you're going to apply those skill sets like it sounds like you have. Because in the background that you went in just a few minutes ago, you kind of went into quickly, obviously, because I know how you are. Like you're but in a good way. I mean that, Taylor. But you kind of went into, I learned all these roles in a real short amount of time, and I was always learning, and so before I knew it, this company made you its CEO. Well, and it wasn't before you knew it; you were there quite a while, right? So tell me about, this is a really interesting entrepreneur story in my context, because a lot of entrepreneurs, they start their company, they are the CEO, and then I have on this podcast, interviewing, good job, you hired everybody, you did your things, but you didn't come in as the CEO, but you became the CEO. So let's focus a little more on that startup, even though I still have some more fundamental questions like background, like were your parents entrepreneurs or whatever. Maybe we get to that, maybe we don't. I'm always just curious about like the psychology of that. But there, there's two things. Well, I'm going to table one, but let's tell me about how you transitioned to the CEO role and why you felt like that was right, or the company felt like that was the right time.
For sure. Um, I think I should start by saying that I might be more comfortable with risk than a lot of other people, and I always have been. Um, whether that,
Characteristic for sure. Mhm.
what was that?
No, character trait we see a lot for sure. Yep.
Yeah. So some of the things that uh, other people need in their early 20s to feel like stability, and from a monetary standpoint, I'm getting a salary, I'm getting a paycheck every 2 weeks, whatever. Those things were not that important to me. I knew and I was willing to sacrifice a significant amount of quality of life in order to do the things that I wanted to do and be in the spaces I wanted to be in. And I think if we're talking about, taking those risks early on, which if you're going to fail, failing in your 20s is great because you can
Yeah.
recover. And taking those risks in your 20s is great because you can. But it was just recognizing that in myself. And I don't think I knew it at the time. But looking back at myself versus other people's journey, especially on the other side of this, I'm just like, it's kind of odd that at that age I was just that comfortable with.
Okay. I want to pick on this a little bit. Why do you think you developed that risk taking profile? What in your childhood or your upbringing or something, I don't know, created you to be more comfortable with risk? Because I do feel like, having had a number of these interviews, that's going to be a characteristic we often see.
Mm.
And you also have to have a little bit of confidence associated with that, right? And I'm not talking about like um, the narcissistic level of confidence. I'm talking about like quietly confident. I call it quiet confidence, that and belief in yourself that you can do this. So how did that come about? Because I have my own experiences with that, and so I understood by the time I got to 25, looking back on it when I did my first startup, why I was there. But I'm curious, how did you get there with that comfortability with risk?
I think part of it comes from my father. He's an entrepreneur.
Oh,
And he
okay.
started a company the year I was born. He's an architect and he started a firm in Portland, and it's still alive to this day, although he has exited a while ago. And so, from literally age one, my father was an entrepreneur running a company. And I learned very early on the sacrifices that took and the
Mm,
rewards that it reaped. And so, for me, I think my brain was just wired that way from watching it happen as a child.
yeah.
And he was also a race car driver. And he was
Ah.
also a skydiver, and he did really crazy things, and so did I. Like I bought a motorcycle when I was 20, a Ducati, and I traveled the world alone in my 20s and went to countries that, even now when I look back at some of the things that I did when I was traveling by myself and the places that I went and how comfortable I felt, I'm just
Yeah.
um, yeah, well, young and dumb at some point, but
This
yeah.
makes a lot this That makes a lot of sense. Now,
Mhm.
and I get it. And people have to get there in their own way, in their own time, but I do feel the risk taking, what I call the risk taking muscle, it's a muscle you develop, and the more that you do, the more you get comfortable not only just taking risks but accepting some failures. And as much as no one wants that, and certainly doesn't think it's going to happen, it creates this learning opportunity, and you kind of continue to build on that, and so forth. But you know, it's interesting because you got there earlier, because based on your background and sort of the being exposed to risk. And not to segregate on this too long, but I think in this scenario where we're raising kids and we're not allowing them to fail and risk and lose, essentially, or make them feel like that's not okay, it ends up being a disservice. And it sounds like you didn't have to worry about that. The funny thing about what you just said too, I just had a friend that actually is incidentally an entrepreneur, and he was on this podcast, and his son just went out, who's 17, and bought a motorcycle, kind of behind the scenes, so to speak. And now I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe that won't be such a bad thing later on because of your motorcycle story.
Yeah.
You turned out pretty well. I'll have to make sure he listens to this podcast. So, because yeah, I think there was some frustration with that, but in any event, okay, that's helpful. Thanks for that. I always like to kind of understand sort of the psychological development. Okay, so now you're 22, a little bit more comfortable probably than most. We were getting to the place where you're taking on all these roles. You're needing to learn and grow. I mean, because I can tell, that's part of your temperament too. So how many years, and like, let's get back to what led to sort of that inflection point where, I don't know how big you were at that time as an organization, but sort of why collectively did your team think, okay, Taylor, like, this is time for you to take this and help us get it to the next level?
Yeah, I think we were about 6 years in. They were about 6 years in. I'd probably been there 5 years. And to be honest, I think a big part of it is my comfort with going for it and growth. I have always had a growth mindset, which I will say has served me so well in business and has been difficult in my personal life at times because I have high expectations. High expectations of myself, high expectations of others, constantly wanting growth and wanting things to move faster.
Mm,
And so I think from a standpoint of why I moved into that role, I was asked by the CEO, by the original founder.
yeah.
He We were looking at it, we were looking at the timeline. We had never raised money. We bootstrapped this company all the way to the very end. And this slow growth,
Impressive.
yeah. And I think we had like 7 or 8 people on the team at the time. And we hadn't yet hit 1 million ARR, but we were heading in that direction. And we were kind of looking at the trajectory and the growth rate year over year. And it was just like, we can do better. And there are competitors coming on the market, and we're watching them raise venture capital and meet us where we are after 6 years with just a year under their belt. So it was time to grow. It was time to just go for it. We knew enough. We had a great product. We had an incredible team, and we started to develop partnerships with health insurance companies and brokers. So we had a little bit of we had a lot of scalable opportunity. We just needed to meet it. And so I think what he saw in me was the ability to just go for it.
Yeah. Well, and you kind of mentioned that, obviously you just bootstrapped it the whole way through that. So even when you saw the VC funding around you, there was still sort of a commitment to like, I mean, we don't need to do that. We're going to maintain ownership, because that gets a little scary. And I think, especially when people are in their 20s and they're entrepreneurial and they see all these companies raising money and this kind of thing, and it can make the difference. I mean, at the end of the day, it is additive, right? But you got to have the other things too, great products and stuff like that. I mean, I think my sort of view of the world on that now is, the name of the game is ROI. It's not how much money can you raise, and it's basically how confident and what are you going to do with that money, and are the terms even any good? And I saw plenty of companies around us, like in my last startup in particular, raised 10, 15 million. They were adjacent to us or even doing what we were doing, but they were trying to go after like 5 verticals at once. And so I wasn't intimidated by the fact that that money was raised. Having said that, we did Manzama in that venture. We did raise money because I feel like there were some table stakes that we needed to get to that I just couldn't get to organically. So at that time, when you were like 5, 6 years in, and competitors are ending in, how did you resist the temptation then to raise money? I mean, because I feel like you're a very financeable CEO type. Like if you had gone out there and were active in wanting to do it, you would have been able to do it. What ultimately made you decide not to do that, I guess?
Well, is this where we get to talk about failures?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
great.
I'd love to talk. Yeah, because I mean, I'm going to ask it at some point. I'm going to say, I want to know your biggest failure, your biggest challenge. Um, and all that sort of thing. So yeah, tell me how that looked.
I can build that bridge right now for you.
Okay.
And I'll start by saying that I truly, deeply believe that failures are just lessons, sometimes very painful lessons. But if you learn from it and you don't continue to repeat it, a failure is just another chapter in the book along the way. And I think that as entrepreneurs, we might actually love that part a little bit. At the moment, it feels really bad, but then if you could zoom out and change it and do it different and use the information that you learned to go back at it and with more confidence, I think that that's an incredibly empowering experience. But to go back to your question, VC and a particular failure that I'm actually very grateful for was raising venture capital. In 2018, I went out to raise our first round for Walker Tracker. Mind you, the company was like probably 8 years old at this time. And we had hit $1 million in ARR. So we were pretty bankable. People were very interested. When I pitched in public forums and like did short pitches, everyone was like, holy shit, where have you been? Like, you're just like this little startup, this little bootstrapped Portland startup that is actually running this B2B SaaS company super well. And I was super naive in my approach. I was very burnt out and I hadn't learned the delegation rules yet. I had my hands in absolutely everything, and I hadn't learned to let go and let other people fail forward and let other people lead. And so while I was raising capital, I was also just doing way too much in the business. I had my hands in every single sale. I was still invoicing. I was managing all the finances,
Oh,
the
wow.
operations, and pitching. And so it didn't go super well for me. I don't feel like I walked away with that from a lot of those pitches with confidence.
Yeah.
There were some painful pitches, to be honest. And if you're out there and listening to this, I'm sorry if you were one of the VCs I pitched to on those days. um, but all that being said, we did end up getting a lead. And I had a lot of angel investors that I had spent time with that were interested and believed in me and believed in what we were doing and what we could build. And then probably we were working on a term sheet, and I got a message from a direct competitor asking if we were open to be acquired. And I was like, oh, this is a really interesting path forward for us. We have been doing this for a long time, and I can see the synergies where our two companies together could really take a lot of market share. And so we started the conversation with them. And after it became a real thing and we signed an LOI, I let down the investors and said, I'm going to try and package this company up and sell it. And then the pandemic hit. We were in due diligence, and their capital backing kind of got nervous about what was going to happen in the space. And ended up, some of the deal terms changed. It wasn't as favorable. And to be honest, I believed we could do that much in revenue in the next
Yeah.
year. And so we said no to the deal. Doubled down during COVID. I learned a lot of lessons during that time too. I was like, this is where I bring in the hit by a bus scenario. So anyone on the team that has knowledge that is siloed to their experience or their day-to-day operations needs to be put into standard operating procedures. And so we worked really, really hard to build processes and package it up so that other people could run it. And that was my sole focus from that point forward. I closed the chapter on VC, in some way with my tail between my legs. But I looked forward for a sale, and I was like, this is the right path for this company. And if we bootstrap it to the end, we own the entire cap table, and we get to make the decisions on who buys us and what the terms look like. And so we ran really hard at revenue and partnerships and growth and ops for the next year and a half. And then I put together a SIP deck, like a basic little presentation deck, and did some initial outreach to strategic companies that I thought would be a good fit and why I thought they'd be a good fit. And, you kind of play that elusive game of like seeing a lot of consolidation in the market. And I think there could be an interesting partnership here.
Yeah.
Do you want to buy us and incorporate us into your platform?
Yeah.
And I got interest. I got interest fast. And so then I had the, oh shit, I don't know how to do this moment. And I don't know how to broker a deal and create FOMO and get the best possible terms out of this. So I started talking to brokers or advisors that might be able to help us through that process. And Justin Johnson had just sold his company, and he used this team, Traction Advising, out of Seattle. And I ended up talking to those guys. It was a done deal in 15 minutes. I will know those people until I die. They are fantastic human beings, incredibly smart, and just just great people. They probably 4x'd what I could have gotten on the deal. So I ended up working with them. It was like an 8-month process, and they did a ton. They reached out to 300 potential buyers, 100 financial buyers, 200 strategic buyers, and we went through their entire process, and it was the right move for the company. So talking about failing forward, I think what felt like the biggest failure for me to bring to my company, not being able to effectively raise venture capital and pour gasoline on the fire that we had stoked for so long, then ended up being every single employee got paid out, and we were able to kind of take care of everyone and shepherd them into this next journey and chapter.
Yeah. Hey, I love that. That was a great articulation. And I mean, I can't help but think about it as you were talking about it. I like the notion of failing forward, because usually if you're incorporating failure in the right way, you're actually building on it, and what may seem like a failure actually is ends up being additive or a win. There's a saying that I always like what kind of on these Confucius things. Sometimes we win when we lose. Sometimes we lose when we win. Because if we win but we didn't do it in an ethical way or something, we really lost, right? And if we what we see as a loss sometimes is actually a win. And that simplification for me helps me integrate failures. But as you said, I was like thinking, like, how's this a failure? This hardly seems like a failure. I think, as an entrepreneur, when you're doing as much as you're doing, you already said it, I have high expectations of myself. So, you create this standard for yourself that when all things don't work the way that you think they should, and if that's in your case, I would say in some ways that's one of your superpowers, because the high expectation leads to a team that performs well, the right measurement tools, great customer service, attention to detail on product, all those kind of things. But it can, I mean, you said it earlier, it can be a double-edged sword, right? The high expectation also translates into ways that it's not so great. So I feel like what we learn as we entrepreneur and we grow is our superpowers are um, can also be our detriments, and that, I mean, I kind of segued back to that, because when you said that, I didn't want to leave that thought. More going back to your failure though, and the build forward. I mean, that's just a great application of why never quitting and executing is important. And you threw a lot in there too. I mean, the burnout thing is so common
Mm.
for entrepreneurs. 5, 7, 8 years in, you just indicated you're 8 years in, so you know watching that, I think maybe you can articulate a little bit more your advice to an entrepreneur and how they kind of peel themselves away from there when they've been involved in that at that sort of level, because you don't really recognize it in yourself. You're just doing, you always do it. So what sort of a health issue, which is sort of what I had in my first startup. I mean, boom, I'm in the hot. I mean, it's kind of alarm bells went off, and I knew I had to do things different, after that. And there were other factors contributing in my life, like relationships that weren't going well and that kind of thing. So it felt like all these things came together. But I mean, I kept going after that. But in a way, I kept going at a like a better way to describe it, maybe simplifying it even, but in somewhat of a smarter way, or just less of a way where I was sort of letting go a little bit more. I was a little more okay with not succeeding, and I don't like even admitting that because so what advice would you have for an entrepreneur at that point, and in transitioning that, and what were how did you ultimately, well, you ended up selling the business, but you did get burned out, and how'd you get back in the game, and maybe just give a little bit of color to that.
Oh man, burnout is real. And for anyone experiencing it right now, like I got my whole heart in there with you. I think it's really hard to see burnout when you're heading into it. And even when you're in it, I was, at least I'll speak for myself, super reactionary. I wasn't making good decisions. I was impulsive. There were things like interaction with employees where, something went wrong. And if I had been in a higher operating space, I would have been able to deal with it in a more mature manner. And I didn't. And
Mm,
those are some of the things that I think are almost more important failures than the VC failure, is like not handling things with employees the way I wanted to. And it was because I was operating on fumes. But if you ignore burnout for long enough, it will tell you. And so whether it's, you
yeah.
ending up with massive health issues, I had the same thing happen to me. I had autoimmune stuff going on. I had leaky gut. I was a mess. I stopped
That was
sleeping.
mine. Yeah.
Yeah, and I
Yep.
had to claw my way back from the depths of that through working with a functional medicine doctor and like learning how to sleep. And for me, what would happen is I'd be exhausted all day long, and then I would go lay in bed and just ruminate on all the things I was doing wrong in my business, or all the things, the checklists, and they were never
Yeah.
ending. Oh, I forgot to do that. And then I would have a notepad next to my bed. So I would unload all the information, but it just didn't stop coming. I went to a
Hmm.
sleep psychologist that had me do a sleep restriction diet, which essentially meant you're not sleeping and we need to retrain your body how to do so. So what essentially we did was you can go to bed at midnight and then you have to wake up at 4 in the morning. And once you're sleeping from midnight till 4 in the morning, you can add another 30 minutes. So for a week, I would sleep for 4 hours and then I would add another 30 minutes or an hour. And so I built my way back up to like
Dang.
sleeping six or it was awful. But also, it was the only thing that worked. And when I get in those cycles again, I kind of start to do that where I just force myself to start waking up at like 5 in the morning and
Yeah.
your body naturally responds. But all that said, on the other side of it, if I could give myself advice or give advice to entrepreneurs who are heading towards burnout, are in burnout, or want to prevent burnout so they have a longer ramp, it's a lot of self-care and it's a lot of discipline. And everything you say yes to is saying no to a lot of other things. And every no is saying yes to something that's more important. And
Mm-hmm.
so be careful with where you allocate your yeses and your time. You cannot do everything despite your brain going, yes, you can do everything. Let's go. We are only human and you do need to have some sort of balance. And I actually find now that when I work a little bit less from an hours standpoint and I take care of myself, my mental health, my physical health, sleeping, social health, I operate really, really well on less time throughout the day. Time blocking has been super important to me. So, like, yeah, I'm not going to work until midnight anymore. Some people work really well late at night or super early in the morning or whatever. And I think you should work with your own inner clock. But for me, I have to schedule time for deep work so I don't get meetings scheduled all over the place. I have to set strong boundaries and I have to honor them with myself. And then it's just the basics of like eating healthy food, exercising every day, making sure you're not missing out on life, because in the end, you can be a wildly successful entrepreneur and sell a company and you might be on the other side by yourself. So,
Yeah. Well,
nurturing.
I liked, when you were talking about this journey and then you ended up having a result with the strategic and one of the things that I try to advocate with entrepreneurs, because I believe it's possible if you are listening to advice and you're sort of introspecting enough to understand that you can do this. And I want to say have it all. Like you can be engaged in other aspects of your life. Your business isn't going to fail. You can hand off things if you're have the right people in place, it's not going to fail, so but you need to set things up organizationally, right? So for me, I was never able to get to that place until I felt like I had the right values in the company, and I knew that the people that were associated with those values would sort of maybe they wouldn't work as hard as I was going to do same hours, and that's a hard thing to expect.
Mm.
But they would at least operate with those same values, so the results would be good or great, hopefully, when they're engaging a customer or dealing with an issue and they care about on that same level. So I'm just curious from your standpoint, as you started to organizationally make that transition and with different roles, how big of a part did the company values play into your organizational success?
Yeah, it's
Or did they? If they didn't, that's fine too. I mean, it's just something I want to know, like, because
yeah,
people talk about them a lot, right? And so, was that a piece that that you think was, determinative in your outcome?
100%, absolutely. And I will say that the company's values and culture was really driven by the team, and I can't really take full accountability or ownership for that, because I had an incredible team, and I don't like. I count myself so lucky to have those people by my side that just believed in me. Like they were like, she's out there, she's doing it. I'm gonna follow her. And inside of me, I'm like, why are they following me? I don't know what I'm doing.
I think it's pretty easy to see, but I get you. It's good to, yeah, it's humility. That's good.
Yeah, and like
But okay.
I think a lot of people feel that way, and we just don't say it out loud. And I think, to be honest, it's kind of cool when you look up to someone and they're just like super, super vulnerable. And I did try to bring that to my team. I don't think I set the best examples at time at times for my team,
Mhm.
but they built an incredible culture at Walker Trucker. And I did not know how unique and how incredible it was until I was on the other side of it. And I look back and I'm like, that was a once in a lifetime ride with those people at my side and building that culture and building the values from the inside out. And
I
so,
just got I just got goosebumps when you said that, because I feel like this is the scenario that I hope entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs, are able to build and they're looking for, is that when you are done with that ride, you do feel like it's a once in a lifetime. And it doesn't mean that it is, but it may be actually hard to emulate again. Okay, because that first business I had in my 20s, years later, when people, that was only around for 5 6 years and then it sold. But years later, I remember people saying, God, that was the best thing I ever did, the best job, this and that. And then I'm like, I kind of remember going like, okay, I appreciate that, and we all were on a mission working hard, but I wasn't really that cognizant about defining the values, like I got, as I became more cognizant with Manzama and like really what are the values. I'll talk about that in a minute, because I think there's an evolution of that. But it took another 10 15 years. I mean, I joined another startup that I felt like had that energy too in LA, and that was great. And actually that was very memorable, but it was very short run for me because that company exited. It takes a long time. It takes the right circumstances for that to line up, and we should be really grateful when we see it. And for me, if I have the former Manzama employees and they say that they had the same sort of reaction to it, and I hope, and I think many that have come have told me that they did, is that's really gratifying, to know that you were in an organization with those kind of values and culture, and that you were, whether consciously aware of it or not, you know, created that culture. And I had to ask the question because I do think it's a pattern. Like people think, oh, it's just the idea, that was the right place, right time. But you had 5 competitors, 6 competitors, and
mhm.
Kyle, who I had on here the other week, he, the Special Forces Army Ranger gentleman that then transitioned to starting a company and successfully selling it to a private equity company. We had the same conversation on some, and he said something, and I'm always going to remember this. He said, our values were our immune system,
Mm,
right? So if we hired the wrong person, like the immune system kind of kicks that person out, or something, you encounter a problem in the market. If your value is like problem solving, we're just problem solvers. That's who we are. That's one of our values. You solve the problem as opposed to see that as a major setback. So they do matter, is what is the point of what I'm saying. And I think we're both saying, and I just wanted to spend a little time on it because I try to understand how important that is to the entrepreneurial venture. And it sounds like pretty important. And so in your next venture, are you applying values right away, and or how's that building in the company that you're building now? I'm kind of segueing to that a little bit. If you're good with that, um, I don't know. Maybe you can tell me how you're doing it when now that you're back at, another. I don't know if you're full time in this next startup or what your role is. You're shaking your head. You are full time. So tell me about. Okay, well, I guess first of all, you had the exit, which is great, and gosh, that was pretty amazing how the venture thing didn't work out and it worked to your favor. That was a fortunate result. But I've also, when I listen to you, Taylor, like you lean on your ecosystem. Like you mentioned Justin Johnson, he was also on the podcast and had Lead Method, and he'd sold that company, and you and I got to know each other. You were part of this Opportunity Knocks CEO group where you were learning, and I'm like that. That trait. We're just kind of going over it, but that's an important trait. And actually, maybe this is what I told you I'd do. I'm going to ask like 3 or 4 questions before we get to the segueing into what you're doing now. Tell me about like what are your top 2 or 3 traits that you think are important for an entrepreneur to have, or character traits, or I don't know, just whatever, personal dispositions, or what does that look like for you? Like, what do you think you need to have?
Oh, I think it comes in lots of shapes and sizes. So I'll speak from my perspective, what I believe works for me. And honestly, the kind of CEO I'd want to follow and the kind of CEO I am following right now. Um,
Okay.
Resilient as fuck. And excuse
Yes,
me
perfect.
for saying
No.
that, but like the type of individual that is never going to give up. I had an investor tell me, this was prior to me raising money. I was at a founder's Christmas party and talking to his investors, and I asked him why he invested in this company, and he said it wasn't the company, it was the founder, because I know that guy is never going to give up. He actually used these words. He said, he's a boneyard dog, and he is never going to let go of the bone.
Mm.
And he was absolutely right. This person will continue to pivot and continue to evolve and continue to grow and learn until there is an exit in some successful manner. So I think if I'm committing myself, and to me, that is not just a job, that is, I am committing my energy, my blood, sweat, and tears, my time away from work. Like it's a big deal for me to make that commitment. So if I'm doing
Yeah.
that, I want to follow a leader that's done the same. I want to follow. So if I'm putting money in, I want to know you have too. Or if I'm putting the time in, I want to know you're right there with me. And so I think watching a leader that's all in on what they're
Yeah.
doing is really inspiring. Um, Compassion and empathy, I think, are really important. And I say that because I don't think I always did the best job of it at times. I think there are
Yeah.
times that I railroaded people's emotions to get to the goal. And I am mature enough now to say that on a podcast, but I don't think I would have been a few years ago. But yeah, it's understanding your team's strengths, leaning into them, trusting them, because if the team is, I mean, the team is just so critical. The team is everything. I couldn't have done what I did without my team, and letting them evolve into different spaces and being flexible. Like if they're not in the right role, but they're super critical to the organization. They have amazing skills. They have the right mindset for it. I actually heard a podcast the other day where a founder was talking about hiring the right team, and he was like, it's actually not about skill set. Skill set comes later. When you're hiring your
Yeah.
VP of sales, you want to know that that person has run a sales team and built a sales pipeline and knows how to organize all of that. But at the beginning, it's bringing the right mindset to the table. Like, are these people the people that are just going to be like, let's throw it at the wall and see if it works, and let's pivot and let's do what we have to do. Let's learn from the customer. Let's talk to them. Let's, there's a lot of creativity that goes into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think there's some soft skills there that are really important, and then there's just an internal drive. And
So you from your this next company that you're going following this CEO, as opposed to being the founder yourself, because now you've been the CEO and founder, you're willing to relinquish that. I call you a founder if you're employee number one. I mean, that's just, I know you're that graciously saying like I was employee number, but that sounds like sort of almost like a co-founder at least. But you eventually become CEO, and now you're okay not being in that operating role, because that's a tough thing for former CEOs to do. Because I think one of the things you hear from entrepreneurs is, I get into corporate America, they waste my time. I mean, I'm really bad with time being wasted. And as soon as I'm in a meeting, and this was difficult when we were acquired, because I saw it in my other acquisition too. I mean, I know that I'm not going to last because I'm just really bad in any kind of wasteful scenario. So, but I did one point in my career follow a leader that had the same kind of temperament tendencies, even though he was a first time entrepreneur. So, I think that's a great point, especially for someone that's not ready to take an entrepreneurial jump, even in that context, to, you know, understand how to identify with the right horse to align with.
mm,
Do you know what I mean? And so you now know that because you've been through that. And just prior to the podcast, we were talking a little bit about your current company and some of the things that are starting to happen and some of the success you're starting to see. And my guess that a good percentage of that has to do with that decision of aligning with that right team member. And obviously he or she is seeing that in you too, right? I mean, this is a reciprocated thing, especially when we're talking early on,
mhm.
because those people early on, right? They're the ones that create the culture, and then the culture permeates.
Yep.
So I it's, I'm going to stick on this for just a minute, because the resiliency thing, Taylor, for me is like, it's kind of a scary thing, because it's why we get into burnout. It's, it's kind of succeed at all costs. You want it,
Mhm.
but you also have to, you also have to do it in a way where, like we indicated before, like you don't run into a wall, and you're not the most effective leader at that point. And Yeah, obviously these are things we learn as we get older and later. And I like your other character trait of empathy. I don't think it's too unusual for first time entrepreneurs to you're naturally a driver. I believe I probably railroaded some people early on. I really didn't like the meetings where we weren't getting things done. Um, I wasn't very great at listening if I already felt conviction around which way we needed to go. Sometimes it's better just to have the meeting and listen, even if you do end up going the way you think you're going to go. Right. So these are things that are going to help entrepreneurs by just hearing you kind of unpack that a little bit. So you got resiliency, the character trait of empathy, and really, being better at sort of cognitive listening to your employees. Is there another trait? And then maybe if not, that's cool. Then that we can move on to kind of how you align with this next business, what you plan to do with that business, and what other lessons you would take forward to what are you going to do differently, you think, this time, if anything.
Mm.
That might be helpful too.
Yeah. As you were talking about that, the one thing that comes to mind is self-awareness, because the balance that we've been flirting with this whole time of being resilient and being super driven and just going relentlessly towards that goal must be balanced with taking care of your employees, taking care of yourself, taking time away, having really strong boundaries. And to be honest, that did not come to me until after the sale of the company. There were some things that had to happen from a health standpoint, but it really took me 2 years of unwinding post exit and relearning how to live like a normal person.
Yeah.
It was a really big struggle. The first six
Yeah.
months, I was anxious all the time. I'm like, I'm not doing enough. I don't have enough
Yeah.
going on every single day. I'm not contributing enough. I'm not producing enough. And so much of my self
Yeah.
worth was tied up in
Yeah.
producing value for other people and external stakeholders. And so I had a lot of unwinding to do. So know thyself, and do.
Well, that's one of my favorite sayings is no se te ipsum, know thyself. I mean, it applies to also what you're going to do like what skill you have as an entrepreneur and how you're going to complement your entrepreneurial skill set. So you got to know it from the onset. I love that you said that. You got to know it later. Okay, so you unpack that. Did you stay on with that company that acquired you for a while? I mean, they wanted you in a certain role, but was that consulting for full time, and were you able to stay engaged, in that effort?
Yeah, it was an interesting journey. We stayed on for about a year. Ben and I, the CTO, co-founder, and we wanted to integrate and shepherd the company as best as we possibly could. It was very important to us that both like the employees and the product made it to the other side successfully, and not we didn't lose a single customer in the acquisition, which I think is a pretty, I don't know, odd, but remarkable thing. All of our
Yeah.
customers went over, and I really wanted to make sure that on the other side we caught them. It wasn't like,
Yeah.
good luck, it's going to be great over there. We hope it works out for you. No, we're on the other side to catch you, integrate you, and make sure everything is seamless. Yeah, but from a culture standpoint, I think going from a company of like 20 people that I knew very, very well, and we were, had this really cool culture that we all loved and were totally a part of, to being a part of a private equity backed large organization that was distributed across multiple countries.
Mhm.
It was a culture shock for me, and
Yeah.
just the pace at which things and changes and pivots can happen
Yeah.
was uncomfortable. So again, I would say there was a good amount of anxiety for me during those days. Um,
Yeah.
and even post, exiting that company where I was full time in a role as a VP, and after that, I really did ask myself, am I an entrepreneur? Do I do this again? Do I start something or do I go get a job? And that was a big question for me for honestly like 2 years. I went back and forth. I would start something, or I would work with founders. I think I started 3 or 4 different businesses and then shuttered them, most of them before I got the chance to fail. So me going in on this next thing is actually a really big deal, because I'm like, let's go full send. I'm committed. And it took me a while to
Yeah.
get there. There was a lot of process baked into that. And for any founder out there that's about to sell their business, just sold their business, is in integration and wants to talk about this stuff, please direct message me. I will talk about this all day long, one-on-one. Because I think there is not enough information and there's not enough vulnerable founders out there that will talk about the shit that happens after you sell the company. It's not all like parties and money and boats and cars and all the amazing things that you get to do. It's not. It's
Right.
like there is kind of that day after where I felt personally an immense sense of like, I was like, oh no, it's over. Just kind of sadness and loss that goes
Yeah.
along with the celebration. So it's a little bit of a dichotomy of there's this amazing up and this amazing you've achieved this mission, and then realizing that all of your energy and excitement was tied to the process of the mission.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think any founder it will naturally feel that, or even a co-founding team, and maybe in a broader team than that, as you've sort of built something over a period of time. In our case, it was 10 years, when we had our exit. It's even, as I was thinking about you telling your story, I would think it might even be more challenging if you hadn't taken money, which you all hadn't, right? You ended up in a bootstrap mode, and now it really is something where you can't make the excuse. Like, I mean, it's not even an excuse; it's a responsibility. Like, I had a fiduciary responsibility to my investors when I told this story that and we required money, that we're gonna get them, and we're gonna move towards an exit for all of us, and needs to be good for everybody. And that was the I guess that's the trade-off you make, and you have to be comfortable with that. And so, I guess, in that context, and I always, so when the Manzama mission was over, I guess the way um, I would sort of absorb that, or I don't even say justify. It's just like, look, I mean, you did something for 10 years, you created a great work environment. Everybody, change is inevitable, nothing's permanent, and we all need change too, even the founders of their missions. And some may need it in 5 years, some may need it in 15, 20, whatever the time horizon is. And it's okay.
Mm.
Take what you built, find it again, learn, grow, meet new people. Because not that there can be complacency, because but there can be, like, people got to get a little complacent. Like, this is okay, we did it, we're here, and we're making money, and it's profitable, and we're still growing. And it got kind of, how do you get those juices going again? So there's good, like, as you indicated, there's good and the bad to it. But I think it's, as you now took your time, which I think is impressive that you took your time, even though you said you started a few things and you kind of tested the waters on some stuff, which is not unusual. Gosh, I was thinking about when you were saying that, after I sold my first startup, and then I went and rented a condo thinking I'm going to take a bunch of time in Sun Valley, and, for 6 months, and I left after 2 months, and I had prepaid the whole thing.
Yep.
So I skied for 2 months, and I was just like, at that time, my fiance and I was like, who's my wife today still, I was like, I got to get back out there. I can't deal with this. Like, I'm skiing, I'm taking 45-minute walks, I'm reading the paper. And that next business failed
Mm.
because I rushed right into it, and I wasn't into it for the right reasons. I was going through the motions of it, and it was, there are other contributing factors, but I thought I knew what I was doing because I'd done it before, type of thing. Oh, now I got this. And that did raise money, lost my money, other people's money, and it felt awful. And I didn't ever want to do that again. So uh, I think in this context where you're at, where you're kind of, why I'm even relaying that at this particular time, is in the context of you going through time to identify your next, endeavor, I think is important, unless you really do have that next thing lined up, like our friend that we mentioned, Justin
Oh, yeah.
Johnson, who seems to have that next idea all ready to roll. And it worked out great, and probably his next one will too. I mean, I'm just so impressed by that aspect sometimes. But tell me about, okay, you're now 2 years, and now you're in, and you're all in. It sounds like you identified with the leader. What else are you identifying with in this next? Because it is a startup. I would say you're still in the startup mode, right? I mean, you're okay, yeah. So maybe tell us a little bit about, before we end up, wrapping up here today. Like, how did that? Um, how are you identifying that company, and what are you guys up to?
Yeah, absolutely. First, I'll tell you that I also flew overseas to take, the eat, pray, love approach to coming back to life after the startup. I went to Asia, and I spent a significant amount of time in Indonesia. But man, after 2 months, I was like, I need to do something. So like, just very similar to you, I had planned 6 months to a year of travel, and I ended up coming home because I was just too anxious. So anyways, my current role, I am the COO of Somos. And Somos, just for some background about what we do before we dive into why I am there, and
Yeah, for
a little
sure.
bit about the CEO and the team. So Somos harnesses the power of video games, backed by rigorous medical research and development, to unlock the innate healing power for the brain and the body. Our goal is not just to treat disease and to treat injury, but to redefine what it means to heal as a human. And
Mm.
these are not your typical video games. These guys, the founders, are actually AAA game developers, and they build
Mm.
worlds. They build entire crazy worlds. These people are incredibly talented inventors. And they teamed up with um, trauma surgeons and built a couple of class 2 medical devices that are both ready to ship. Sine and RoboArms, which is the tech stack, is actually a direct result of revolutionizing prosthetics, which was a program at DARPA. And so they have spent the last 5 years in R&D building these incredible products that heal people. And we have over 1,000 patients that have gone through the testing and the pilot programs at OHSU or Johns Hopkins. They've also built incredible partnerships like Walter Reed. And so, to be honest, when I think about these guys and when I came on, I was like, you have traction coming out of every area of your company right now. And Peter Lund, the CEO, um, he's a very unique character. And he is the type of CEO that I want to work with for like the next decade, and I want to follow because he has those traits that I mentioned before. One, they've been at this for 5 years, and they will never stop. They just want to heal people, and they're in it for the right reasons. They just want to do this right, and they want to get as much access into this as possible. And so that one is very inspiring to me. He also already has the chops and maturity from being a multi-time like founder and operator to run and build teams with compassion and understanding that we're not all perfect and we're going to mess up, and we're just figuring it out together. And so there's just this, oh man, it's like being in the mission together. Like we're building the rocket ship and going to the moon, and that feels really incredible.
Yeah.
And right now, our goal is to bring those products to market. We already have patients, we already have prescribers ready to go, and so we're figuring out what the best pathway is to commercialize and take those to market. And we have a lot of interesting pathways that we're exploring right now in degenerative diseases, and as I mentioned prior to this call, ALS specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, I mean, trauma, whether it's physical injury or it's PTSD or expanding to other neurodegenerative diseases, and what we can do to help provide agency, independence, hope, and for people in the ALS seat, like range of motion and the ability to move their body longer than they may now without treatment protocols around these.
Yeah, what amazing mission, and as you were sort of relaying, Somos and your sort of your destination of where this thing could go with video games and everything, and the application of that in a healthy manner.
Mhm.
I was thinking about back to your sort of initial premise of entrepreneur and where you wanted to spend your time entrepreneuring, which was in health and fitness and mental health and all these, and I talk about this from time to time, and you're kind of an example of this because you've sort of you've gone in a domain with Walker Tracker and now your next venture, and you've spent all this time in these areas of health, fitness, mobility. And so a lot of this is, yeah, you found the right leader, but you're in a domain that you understand and that you're passionate about.
Yeah.
I mean, I just got your passion there as you're sort of articulating this, right? And so, that's an important aspect to the end journey here, right? That to likely being successful. You've already had, like, it sounds like amazing success at this early stage. So, congratulations on that. And the other thing I really, just looking at it from the outside in, and you try to sort of pattern recognition, like entrepreneurs are going to be successful again. And by and large, a big thing I typically see, I mean, this is not always the case. I just feel like people that operate within their domains or adjacent to that, really close to, and continue to build on that over the course of 15, 20 years, they tend to de-risk their startups a lot more because they have either the passion or the understanding of those industries. It's really hard to go to another industry. I'm not saying impossible, but I had a guest on here who had built something and done something great and had a great exit to a Fortune 100 company. Was out of the game for a while, came back in to do another startup out and it, invested and then took the CEO role in an industry he hadn't been in. And, we talked about a little bit on the pod. That one kind of didn't really work. I mean, they got some result from it, but it, off the script, so to speak, it was like, yeah, but I don't know if I'd ever do that again because I thought I had to learn all these things I didn't know about that industry. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not discouraging anybody from doing that. I'm just saying it's an understanding, it's a risk, it's a passion. These are subtle things because, you know, it's already hard, right? It's already going to be hard, or there's going to be institutionalized thought process or products or things you have to see. So it's already hard. Try to make it a little easier on yourself with lining up these sorts of aspects or elements. And it sounds like in this case you have. So I just wanted to point that out.
Mm-hmm.
And not this, like I said, I had this other guest on, Nick, last week, who's now doing this water company, but he not yet named, and he's been in software, and he's going to kind of basically compete with what's the canned water?
Liquid Death. I listened to that
Yeah,
podcast. That was great.
yeah, in Mexico City. So
Mm-hmm.
here you go. And I said it in the thing. I go, hey, that's kind of a big jump. Like, why do you think you can do this? And so I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying like, you know, this is it's like, how do you improve your probability for success, let's say? And obviously funding can help and all that kind of stuff. And the characteristics and the values that we talked about you're looking for in that leader. And well, congrats on that. The last thing I'll just say, like, I love your know thyself, because it sounds like in this context you're leaning into a role and a position of like, you feel like these are your best skill sets. I know you've got other ones. I feel like you could go run this thing too, but in this context, it feels right. Like, I'm going to play this part like I did earlier, and let's see sort of where it goes from here, type of a thing. Yeah.
Absolutely. I am actually really glad to not be in the CEO role. I think this is the right next step for me, and I'm very excited to operate in my own domain without having the end all be all buck stop at me. So to me, actually, this is fantastic. I'm really excited about the space, the opportunity, and my goals are very clear. I don't feel like I'm, in the CEO role. You're like all the goals kind of roll up under you at some point, and
Yeah.
go to market, commercialize, operationalize. Like I live in that world. So it's a good fit.
Well, it's also cool though, but you're part of the founding team. You're part of that sort of the energy about bringing this to market still. And honestly, I empathize with what you're thinking there, because one of those startups, the four I mentioned, the third one, I wasn't the CEO. I just, like I indicated earlier, I came in, and a lot of ways I wasn't ready for that again, because
Yeah.
you sort of know what comes with that, and the cost that comes with that, and you need to have the right amount of energy and conviction that this is the time for you to do that again. And it's just, it's all a journey, and you're young, you're really young still, so you got time. Who knows if you do that again or don't, but you kind of went up on the mountain and figured, this time I need to do this, and I feel consciously I don't want to do that. And that's, I mean, it's weird, we have similar paths, because I did the same thing. And but I also had a CEO that was a really good listener. He wanted to, kind of had that attitude. He didn't know everything, and he was incredibly bright, charismatic person. Still a great friend today. Ultimately, when it built another company, he'll be on this pod at some point. We've already talked a couple times. He's actually now teaching an MBA level course. But point is, like, if you find those things, that's a great place to be, for any young aspiring entrepreneur that just wants to learn too.
Mm.
This is so anyways, I really appreciate, there's a lot more I want to ask you, and I hate ending these conversations, but I also want to stay at that kind of time frame that we're at. I know you've got a busy schedule, and I just appreciate your time. And when you and I talked about this and your great attitude towards giving back to entrepreneurs, even though as busy as you are, and, understanding what we're trying to do with this podcast, Bending Rules. And it's really great. And I just want to say thank you for that. And I know we're going to be in touch here soon again, but, I'll be obviously, cheering along your journey.
Thanks, Pete. This was awesome. It was great to chat with you as always. I always find these conversations, one, just really easy. It's very easy to talk to you. So I want to thank you for that. And serving up a lot of really cool questions that made me dive into things that I haven't talked about, or at least I haven't said out loud.
Yeah, absolutely. Partly I was thinking when we were doing these things, Taylor, is like, it's you don't go out a cup of coffee and then ask a person just to completely break down their story, right? It's an unusual thing, right? But when it does happen, I'm always like, oh my gosh, this could have benefited me when I was
Mm,
26.
yeah.
So I think you're going to benefit someone. I already know that we have, and I'm glad that you saw that, and thanks for saying that. And have a great rest of the day. And we will go get that cup of coffee here pretty soon.
All right. Sounds good, Pete. Thanks.
Cheers. All right. Great talking with you.
Bye.
Bye.